Daniel Evans had always been underestimated. Dismissed and treated like a fool, no one believed he stood a chance when he stepped into the courtroom to expose a legal fraud. The room was already against him before he even spoke. Dressed in a slightly worn suit with a tie a bit off-center, Daniel wasn't a lawyer and never claimed to be. He was just a poor man determined to save his mother's home from a corporate machine that saw people as mere numbers on a balance sheet. Judge Philip Carter peered over his glasses, the corners of his mouth twitching in something that wasn't quite a smirk. Leaning back in his chair, he tapped his gavel lightly. "Mr. Evans, representing yourself?" The question dripped with amusement. Daniel met his gaze. "Yes, Your Honor." A chuckle echoed from the other side. Marcus Reynolds, the opposing attorney, adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate ease. A corporate bulldog known for steamrolling small-time defendants, Reynolds saw Daniel as no challenge. "This should be quick," Reynolds muttered to his assistant, loud enough for Daniel to hear. But Daniel kept his face still. He knew what it felt like to be dismissed. That's why he was here. Judge Carter sighed, flipping through a file. "This is a property dispute, correct? A foreclosure challenge?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir. My mother's home." Carter barely glanced at him. "And you believe you can argue this case against a seasoned attorney like Mr. Reynolds?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I don't believe, Your Honor. I know." The courtroom went quiet. Chuckles from the corporate side lingered, but there was also an unspoken silence, the kind that comes when someone unexpected refuses to back down. Judge Carter shook his head, a slight smirk betraying his otherwise stoic demeanor. "Very well, let's get on with it." Reynolds, confident as ever, straightened his suit and delivered his opening statement with a practiced ease. He painted Daniel as a man clinging to false hope, someone unable to accept reality. With precision, he emphasized the law, contracts, deadlines, and obligations, asserting that his client had followed every letter of the law while Daniel had not. Daniel sat still, unmoved, his face betraying no emotion. Rising from his seat, he adjusted his tie and glanced around the room. His eyes met the judge's, who leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, expecting little. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice steady but resolute. "Mr. Reynolds is right about one thing. The law is clear. The question is, does his client actually follow it?" A flicker of irritation crossed Reynolds' face, a crack in his otherwise impenetrable facade. Daniel continued, "I've spent the last 6 months studying every case, statute, and loophole that banks use to strip families of their homes. And I found something." Judge Carter raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "Something?" "Yes," Daniel nodded, "and it changes everything." The courtroom held its collective breath. The word fraud hung in the air like an unwelcome guest when Daniel accused the plaintiff of deceit. Reynolds scoffed, calling it absurd, but Daniel pressed on. He approached the bench with 2 copies of the original mortgage agreement. The tension in the room crackled like electricity. These 2 documents, identical in every way except for one thing, the signatures don't match. The plaintiff claims my mother signed this the day after she was hospitalized for a stroke. She couldn't speak, let alone sign her name. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Judge Carter leaned forward, examining the documents with narrowed eyes. "Mr. Reynolds, do you have an explanation for this?" Reynolds hesitated, his confidence faltering. "We would need time to retrieve the original documents," he stammered. "That's fine," Daniel replied calmly, "but there's more." The courtroom, already tense, grew even more still. Daniel highlighted the missing endorsement on the last mortgage transfer, a crucial piece proving the current lender had no legal right to foreclose. Judge Carter's tone sharpened, his eyes narrowing with the weight of the revelation. "Mr. Reynolds, does your client have an explanation for why this mortgage was transferred without proper endorsement?" Reynolds scrambled for control, rifling through his papers in a desperate attempt to find an answer. Beads of sweat formed on his brow, betraying his growing panic. Daniel seized the moment, his voice steady and resolute. "Your Honor, this isn't an isolated incident. This bank has a history of questionable foreclosures, and I have the evidence to prove it." The gallery erupted in whispers, a ripple of shock and intrigue spreading through the room. Judge Carter silenced the room with a glare that could freeze time. But Daniel wasn't finished. "I call Martha Collins to the stand." Reynolds froze, the color draining from his face as if the name alone had struck a fatal blow. Martha, the notary public, took the stand, visibly nervous. She clutched the edges of the witness box, her knuckles white. Under oath, her voice trembled, but carried undeniable truth. I notarized the mortgage modification without witnessing the signature. I was instructed to do so directly by the bank. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Even the most seasoned court regulars were stunned into silence. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he exchanged a glance with his mother, who sat gripping the edge of her seat. Judge Carter, no longer patient, leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The foreclosure is void. This court rules in favor of the defendant. Mr. Reynolds, you and your client may face further investigation for fraudulent practices. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, the words sinking in. His mother's home was safe. Relief washed over him, mingling with the exhaustion of the grueling battle he had fought. Outside the courthouse, Daniel stood still, the weight of the fight finally lifting from his shoulders. The cool breeze felt different now, liberating, cleansing. Judge Carter approached him, his stern demeanor softened by a rare smile. "You've got a talent, son. Ever consider law school?" Daniel chuckled, the sound mingling with the bustling city noise. Maybe not, but one thing's certain. Power belongs to those who refuse to back down. He glanced back at the courthouse, memories of the battle replaying in his mind. His voice, barely above a whisper, carried a weight far beyond his years. And I'm just getting started. As Daniel walked away, the city seemed to move around him, but he moved with purpose. Each step echoed with determination, each breath filled with resolve. The fight had changed him, forged him into something stronger. The weight of his mother's tearful embrace replayed in his mind, her whispered words of gratitude resonating deep within him. Every late night spent poring over legal documents, every moment of doubt and exhaustion, had led to this triumph. And yet, Daniel knew that his battle against corruption was just a single flame in a world filled with darkness. As he walked through the crowded streets, faces blurred past him, each one carrying their own stories, their own silent struggles. He knew that countless others faced injustices, their voices drowned out by those with power and wealth. The fire within him burned brighter. Daniel stopped at the edge of a park, gazing at the towering city skyline. A sudden downpour began, each raindrop cascading down his face, mingling with his tears. But he stood firm, unflinching. In that moment, a promise formed in his heart, a vow to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, to be the shield against the storms of injustice. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from another homeowner seeking help against an unlawful eviction. Daniel took a deep breath, a determined smile spreading across his face. The battle wasn't over. It was just the beginning. As he turned to leave, the rain intensified, drenching him completely, but Daniel didn't waver. He felt the weight of every person who had been silenced, every family torn apart by greed. His resolve hardened. The echo of his footsteps merged with the rhythmic patter of rain. In the distance, the courthouse loomed like a silent sentinel, a symbol of justice, both served and denied. Daniel knew his journey would be fraught with challenges, but his spirit was unbreakable. Somewhere in the shadows, those who thrived on exploiting the vulnerable would soon learn his name. Daniel Bennett, a beacon of hope, a storm they could not withstand. And with every step forward, Daniel vowed to bring the fight to their doorstep. The world was vast, its injustices many, but so was his resolve. This was not the end. This was the birth of a crusade.